Post-processing our landscape photography images, or in my case, both landscape photography and travel photography images, is something that we all have to do, whether we like it or not. Now, it's fair to say that the majority of us, we use either Adobe Lightroom or Adobe Photoshop, or a combination of both of them, to achieve the results that we need in our post-processing. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to start in Adobe Lightroom with an image that I created in the Dolomites, not the one you see behind me, and then finish off in Adobe Photoshop. Now, if you're thinking, who am I and what am I doing here? My name is Julian Elliott. I'm a professional landscape and travel photographer. If you're interested in keeping up with what it is that I do, make sure you click on subscribe down there and click on the bell up there to get notifications of any new material that I'll be doing, and there will be a lot this year. So let's jump from me to the computer, starting in Adobe Lightroom with an image from the Dolomites that I captured early last November. Okay, so as I mentioned, or I hope I mentioned, this is an image from the Dolomites which I captured back in November 2018. It was around the 12th of November, if memory serves, and according to the date, that's when it was. So as you can see up on the time, it was about 2:30 or so in the afternoon. That may or may not have been the actual time. I can't remember if I'd reset my camera to the correct time or not, so don't pay too much attention to the EXIF data there. It was captured on my Canon 5D Mark IV and a 24-70 Mark II f2.8 lens. And what I did is I used the auto exposure bracketing. I used just 2 exposures because that's normally when I'm blending, I only really need 2 exposures. And I just set it up. I captured this one here. So this was captured at ISO 100, f11 1/8 of a second, and then the darks that I've got there was captured at f11 and 1/60th of a second. So that allowed me to capture all the detail that I needed in 2 different exposures. So if I jump back into the light exposure here, the foreground exposure, you'll see straight away the sky is obviously overblown. Now, not a lot of you who've been following me for a while, you know that I use graduated filters, and you might be saying to yourselves, why didn't I use a grad on this? You'd save yourself loads of time and not be messing about in Lightroom and Photoshop as we're going to do today. Well, sometimes I feel it doesn't always work with grads. You have to know when and when not to use those grads, and this is one of those occasions where I had in the back of my mind I wanted to do a tutorial like this in any case, but for me personally I felt that a grad, it would cut across. I'd have to angle it down here so the grad would cut across this part here, which I didn't really want to do. And so that's basically why I decided to use 2 exposures and do what I'm doing now. Now, the first thing that I do, and I always think, is there any dust that's on the sensor? So in Lightroom, if you press Q, that brings up the dust spots tool here, and then if I press A, what that does is it turns this mask on, and I've put the slider right over to the right hand side, and you should be able to see very quickly if there is any dust on your lens or not. At first glance, there certainly doesn't seem to be anything, so I can pretty much assume that on the second exposure that it's highly unlikely to have any dust. So if I click Q again, that'll get rid of that. Now, next thing that I'm going to do is if I work down from the top, from the basic right down to the bottom, or actually, sorry, what I'm going to do is start at the bottom. I'm going to go camera calibration. Now, I'm not using the most up-to-date version of Lightroom. I think this is version 7.2 or something like that. I go to profile and I always click on camera neutral, and what that does is you'll see there's a slight drop in exposure there. Is it removes any nifty little things that Adobe might have put into their Adobe profile, the Adobe color profile, and I just want it as neutral as I can get it to work from that. The next thing that I do is go up to my basic tab and I think, okay, is the image overexposed, underexposed? You look at the histogram. Of course, you can see here, as I've got the indicators on, it is overexposed in the sky. That's why we're going to be blending and doing other things here. What I do like to do is just add in a bit of white. So I push the histogram over just a little bit and just add in a bit more lights into the foreground, push up the shadows just a little bit, not too much. Add in a bit of vibrance to bring any colour back into any colours that are very weak. That's what the vibrance does. I'm not going to touch saturation. So certainly if we look here in these trees, down here they do look a bit washed out. So we'll just add in a bit more colour here. We're going to do something else in Photoshop anyway, which you'll see. Add in a bit of clarity. And that will add in a bit more mid-range tones in here, but we're going to again be using a few more things in Adobe Photoshop. And then I have to think, does it look okay to me? Now if I look down here at this foreground, you'll see there are some parts that are pretty much that's overexposed down there. So if you look at the RGB, it says 98.3, 97.8, 96.2. Why is it overexposed? It's just a white stone path that goes up there from the bridge. Now, if you are in this valley, in the Valley Funès, and you're thinking, how do I get to this viewpoint? Something I'm going to tell you right now is if you park down here and you walk to this bridge, it will say private property. This is private property. Why was I stood there? Very simple. I had permission. I asked in my the little Italian that I do know, and was told, yes, it's fine, I can stand in the field. So just be aware of that. Don't go and stand where I was thinking that it's fine. It's not fine, it's private property, but I did have permission. Anyway, so let's calm this grass down a bit. So I just got hold of the grad tool there. So let's pull that up. Let's turn on the mask overlay just to see where that's going to affect it. So what I try to do as well is if I just get hold of the grad tool, the further you come out here on the line, the easier it is to maneuver. So if I just pull this around just a little bit, just to line it up with the line that's sort of going up there. Now I don't want it to affect the house, although there was a little bit of overexposure coming in there on the house. What I'm going to do is just pull this down just a little bit. Now from a previous time when I've used the grad, let's set the whites at 25. I'm going to take off the overlay because I know where it's affecting. I'm just going to pull down the exposure just a little bit here. Let's pull down the whites, and you'll see those whites disappear down here on the wood store. So that's pretty much calmed down from where I was. If I quickly do a before and after, you'll see what we've done so far. So you can see there's a bit more color coming back into it. Obviously the sky is still overexposed, but you'll see that I'm not doing a lot at all at this point in Adobe Lightroom. The next thing that I'm going to do is if I've got a single exposure, at times what I do is I use the tone curve to correct any color casts. So if you see here, you will see that looks a little bit blue from this top heavy light that's coming down. So it's very high in color temperature. If I hover over here with my mouse over this dark part, you'll see that it's saying the R and the G are around 18.5%, and the blue, as I can see with my own eyes, is very high. That's what's causing there is a blue color cast in those shadows, which is pretty normal because there's a lot of blue in shadows. But in any case, I think it looks a bit bad, so I'm going to sort it out, not here, actually in Photoshop, and I'll show you how I do that in Photoshop. So I'm going to ignore the tone curve. I'm not going to do anything in hue, saturation, or luminance. The detail, this is my own sharpening that I use for my stock stuff, so sharpening I found works pretty much across the board for what it is that I do. So it's 78, 0.5, 35. Masking is you have to do it image by image, so hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, drag it across, and then you'll start to see it. Sometimes as well, if you've missed dust spots, the masking here will actually show where they are again. So if you think, actually, what is that up there? Is there any? Doesn't look to as if there's any. So there, again, something I found working my own images over the years. I've been doing this 8.5 years now. This is pretty much my default noise reduction. Works on most of what it is that I'm doing. And lens correction. Normally I start with this, but anyway, I'm working down panel by panel, so let's remove any chromatic aberration and any profile correction that needs doing. So obviously around 35mm you'll probably get a bit of barrel distortion there. So that's pretty much all I'm going to do on that image. What I'm then going to do is synchronize those settings across. So when I click on synchronize there, so things I don't have ticked here are spot removal and crop. I haven't done any spot removal anyway, and I haven't cropped the image. So let's just synchronize those two images across there. Moving on to the darks, don't just synchronize and then export your two images. So on this one here, what I want to do is actually start looking at the sky and thinking, how natural does the sky look? I think it looks a little bit unnatural. So what I'm going to do is just undo the clarity on this, undo the vibrance. So it hasn't really, the vibrance hasn't really affected the sky anyway. What I am going to do is just undo those two there. So I'm leaving everything else here because so that the lens correction, what you've seen, the lens profile correction, what that's done, removed any barrel distortion. Synchronize those two across your two blended images so that when you bring them into Photoshop, that is not going to cause any problems. What I am going to do is I am going to push the exposure up just so I can get the sky looking, just for me, just a little bit more natural. So you obviously here in the whites here, I don't want to push this too far in the white so that it overexposes the white. Now what you will see is that if I can just, I might be able to push it just a little bit further. 95% white, I can't push it any further by the looks of it, is pretty much where when you print at 95%, then that's going to, anything above 90%, 95% is not going to print. So they are 94.1, 93.8, 93.9. There's pretty much no color cast in those clouds. That's great for my highlight, for the highlights that I want to do. What I am going to try and do is see if I can just bring up the shadows here in the overlay back there and just push it up. Let's see how much more I can push into this. Again, see if I can push the white actually and without overexposing it. That's probably about as far as I can get it without affecting this too much. Now obviously, as I said, it was very top heavy light. The sun was somewhere up around here, and it will be quite white when the sun is beaming down here. But in any case, that's probably as far as I'm going to push both of those two images. Now I know a lot of people will export to TIFF in this case just for simplicity and avoiding all profile errors etc. between Photoshop and Lightroom. I'm just going to export two JPEGs in this particular instance. So let's go to File, Export, and I've got a folder that I set up different export profiles, as you can see here. So when I'm exporting for Getty, I always set up a specific folder so everything's all in one place, or different libraries that I might be in. So let's just put this in here. So let's just call this Dolomites tutorial, if I can spell it. Then what I'm going to do is go down and make sure that it's going to open up in Photoshop. Now again, I'm not using the most up-to-date version of Photoshop. It's on 2018. I know it's obviously on 2019 now. So when I export, that's going to export these two images to Photoshop, and then we're going to start blending and doing whatever else we need to in Photoshop. So now that our images have opened up in Adobe Photoshop, what I need to do is blend the two images together. Now for those of you that are eagle-eyed, you'll notice on the left-hand corner that I've got the TK Actions panel. What's TK Actions? TK stands for Tony Kuiper, and this gentleman in the United States, he does a lot of things with luminosity masks and all sorts of other things. He's created this great series of panels that he sells, and I think it's about $60 or so. I can't remember which version I'm using. It's a couple of versions old, but it gives me everything that I need to do with the images that I like working on. In any case, I have found over the last couple of months I'm only using 3 panels. It comes with 6. I only use TK Control, TK Rapid Mask 2 and TK Actions. So with that said and out the way, our lights and our darks images have opened up in Photoshop. We need to blend them together. So how can we do that? So there's two different ways to put the exposures actually in the same file. So if you either press Control A to select all of the image, and then Command or Control C, and then you can go to your lights image, then just press Command or Control V, it will just place it right on top. So you'll see down there on the right hand side that there's one layer there for the background layer, which is the lights one there. And then what I'm going to do is just name that quickly to lights. And then you'll see down there there's layer 1, which is the darks. So let's just quickly name that darks. So that's one way of getting in your two exposures together. What you can do is, there's another way of doing it. So if I just remove the darks there, is if I press Command or Control D, that will deselect the image there. If you press V on your keyboard, it gives you the move tool. Hold down Shift, and then if we get hold of this, and then we can drag one to the other. So if it then eventually goes in over the top. There you go. So basically that brings in the darks on top of the lights. Let's just rename that darks. And as you can see, we've got a light and a dark. So let's click off that. Now, a little tip here, if you may or may not know this, if you want to see if your images are actually aligned, is if you go down to the darks image here and click in the blending modes. If you go down to difference, what this does is it gives you this nice funky looking image here, and very quickly, if I zoom into 100%, and then if I hold down the shift, the space bar, sorry, you can see with the difference if the images are actually aligned or not. So if I get hold of the darks image and I start to move it around like this, then you'll see whether your images very quickly have an alignment problem or not, which can happen if you're out and it's blowing a gale out there and you're taking two images. So that's just a little tip there. If I press Command Control Z, it puts them back together again. So difference, so get rid of the difference, blend mode, go back to normal. Now, as I said, obviously we are going to blend these two images together. There are 1,001 ways, as always, in Photoshop to blend images. How am I going to blend mine? I'll show you. So how do we blend two images together in Photoshop? So there are 1,001 ways, as always, with Photoshop to blend images. I'm going to use a combination of luminosity masks and also the graduated filter in Photoshop. Now you might be thinking, why are you talking about the graduated filter in Photoshop? Why didn't you use it in the field, you dummy? Well, because you've got more control in Photoshop when it comes to, as I said, these nice sculpted glacial valleys. So let's look at how it is I'm going to approach it. So the first thing I'm going to do is add on a layer mask. Now, there's various ways of doing that. I find it's just easier clicking down here, adding on the layer mask. If you don't know this, if you press Command I, it will actually turn the layer mask black and invert the layer mask. But I don't need to do that right now. As I said, I am going to use the graduated filter tool. If you press G on your keyboard, what that will do is it will select the tool. Or of course you can go over to the tools panel and just select it. You'll see there's a number of things down here apart from the graduated tool, the gradient tool. I only want the gradient tool. What that will do is if you just drag a line, is it starts creating a gradient wherever you want it to. As in, if you've got a square filter in your camera, you can change the angle. If you hold down the shift on your keyboard, what that does is it will actually restrict how you apply the graduated filter. So if I want a straight line straight down there, this actually works on a lot of other things as well. Holding down shift just creates a very quick gradient. I don't want the grad to actually go, so going the wrong way for me at the moment. It's creating a is masking in the top, I actually need to either press X on my keyboard or just swap these around here. So I want the darks to be showing through here, on this here, on the darks exposure here, while hiding underneath. Now you'll see obviously there's this nice line down here, and that's what I want to follow. So basically if I just create a grad just around there, what that will do is it will very nicely bring in the exposure underneath. Now the problem, again, this is why I didn't use a grad in the field, is that this is what it would have done, is that it's then darkens the hill here and it's darkened the hill over here. So what I try to do is just sort of go down very subtly with the grad tool and just find where it is that I need to go to bring in my the image underneath. So probably somewhere around there, or even there. That's better. So what that's done is I've got this nice blend here. It is a bit too dark over here. So what I am going to do is, I said, I'm going to use a combination of the graduated filter, the gradient tool, plus luminosity masks to bring in this hill over here. And I'm going to use a luminosity mask just for the very simple reason that I'm trying to paint this in with the paintbrush. So if I press B on my keyboard, enlarge my paintbrush, and then start to bring in the, if I get a black paintbrush, change my opacity, change my flow, hold down shift on the number pad, change it to 70. Oh, it's done there. Come on. There we go. So if I start brushing in here, obviously I've got a hard brush at the moment. I want a soft brush. You'll see it's not that easy necessarily. If you go over, then you start getting painting in these different things. So if I go to my history, let's remove the brush tool and remove the brush tool. So anyway, let's try and find a luminosity mask that's going to allow me to paint over this here and bring back in some of the exposure down here, because again it's affected this exposure here. Let's have a look. So if I look at make sure that you click onto your actual image and not the mask itself that I've created here. So I've got a lights and a darks. So I quite like the fact that if I hide this here, I can pretty much get most of that exposure. So let's click on darks 1. Now you can see it's brought in, it's hiding a lot of the sky, which is what I want, and we've got these trees. Now what you can do to further refine this mask is, if on this panel here, this TK Rapid Mask 2, if you click on curves, what this does is, and then if you click on the hand, is you can actually adjust the mask itself. So that's very quickly messing around. You'll see it's changing the actual mask itself. If I just go over here, reset that. So I really want to bring back these trees over here. If I click this hand tool down here, I really want to actually bring through the mask. If I just drag up there, then it's bringing through the trees as I want to see them. So let's just leave it somewhere around there. Click OK. That's giving me the selection. That is the luminosity mask that I've created. It's actually a custom luminosity mask from Darks 1. Let's click on selection. That will select everything there. If I go back to my dark layer, click on the mask itself. If I then press Command H, what that's going to do, or Control H if you're Windows, it hides the selection, but the selection is still there underneath. So when it comes to brushing on top of a mask, don't set your opacity and your flow to 100%. It doesn't work at all. You really want to be brushing these in, the selection on top of the mask. You want to be brushing it in nice and lightly. So if I set my opacity to 30%, so you can either go up You can either change it manually there, you can use the scrubbing tool there, or if you just press 30 on your number pad, if you've got one, then it will change the opacity there. Flow, again, if you've got it up to 100, it will just go right over the top without any care at all. It's better to bring the flow down. I bring it down to about 30 again. And then if I just increase my brush size, and then what that will allow me to do is when I start painting on around here, it will do it very nice, very subtly. So let's see what that starts to do there. So as you'll see, I'm bringing back very subtly the exposure underneath. Now obviously with the lights coming down here from the right hand side, this is lit and this is in shadows. That is how I want to keep it. I don't want to overdo it. And that's why I suggest bringing down the flow of your brush so you can add it in very subtly. Again, here, because the mask is here, I need to bring this back in again, so that this will then even up the exposure down here so that it doesn't look as if a mask has actually gone on top of it. So that started to even up again between this exposure here and here. And again, where the light's falling, these would have had some kind of shadow detail on them. And there you go. That's very quickly brought the two exposures together. It's blended them very nicely together. What can I do with this next? Okay, the next thing that I normally do in images, if I'm being really pedantic with my the images that I'm working on, certainly for a client, is you want to make sure there are absolutely no dust spots at all on this image. How can you do that? Well, the next stage that I would do anyway is basically if I press and hold down Command or Control Alt, then Shift and then press E, what this does is here it's created another layer. And what this has done is combined the two images below into one layer. So if I then add on a curves layer to see where any dust spots are, if I push this up here, now you might be thinking, what on earth is this going to do? You will see, and this is pretty much the ultimate way of finding dust spots. So sorry if this messes with your heads, but basically what this does is this is called a solar curve, and I believe this is used in the film industry. And what you'll find is will tell you very quickly, if I bring this up to 100%, if I look in the sky, you'll see very quickly if there are actually any dust spots at all on this image. Now when I'm looking at this, I'm scrutinizing it on my screen, there are definitely no dust spots at all. So let's press Command Control 0, bring it back to fit on the screen. So let's remove that solar curve there. And there you go. So we are back to our image again, our base image. Right, now as I previously mentioned in Lightroom, you'll see here that it looks very blue in the shadows. Now there is a way of color correcting the images overall, which is basically finding the darkest point in your photograph using a threshold layer and then clicking on that. I'm not sure that will work in this particular case. I'll try it just to show you what it's going to do and what I'm talking about. So go down to your layers here, your adjustment layers. So let's find threshold. So you see it turns the image black and white. Now this is an old school way of color correcting. So if you bring this down here, slide this down and find the darkest point in your image. So let's choose here, probably the darkest point. If I hold down the spacebar command, it gives me my plus tool, my zooming in tool. So you'll see there, if I press I for the eyedropper, you've got this patch here. This is one of the darkest places in the image, which is pretty much confirmed by turning off the threshold layer. So if I shift click there, it puts a point. Now if I go up to my info panel, you'll see there that it says it's 32, 33, 31. So certainly there, that seems to be pretty much as it is. But we know there's a problem here. What can we do? Well, let's go back. Let's remove that. I'm just going to do it by eye, really. My computer catches up. If I zoom in here, and I find a dark point somewhere around here, if I shift click again, you'll see this is point number 2. You'll see it says 50, 56, 84. Definitely a blue color cast. Let's get rid of it. Command 0, that'll bring me back to where I want to be. Go up here, add on a curves. Now as default it goes to RGB. I want the blue channel is the blue channel that is giving me the most problems. Click on the hand, click on the 2, and when what that does, we're going to drag this down. Actually I'm going to have to, as it's gone off the edge of my screen, so I can show you this properly. Let's bring the info panel out. So you'll see once I start dragging down on the curve on that point there that's been created, you'll see that this 84, this is the input and this is the output. I need to get that 84 lower, and what that's going to do is it's then going to add in yellow to the image. So you can see there very subtly that blue is going. Now I'm not going to overdo it, because as I've said, of course there is blue in the shadows anyway. So let's bring that down. Probably somewhere around there is fine. If I bring it down to 56, it'll probably look too warm. Now you might be thinking, how do these work? So basically, if you've ever paid any attention to at all to how images work, you have RGB, red, green, blue. That's how color photographs are made up, 3 different channels. In printing, you have CMYK. The opposite of R is cyan, opposite of green is magenta, opposite of blue is yellow. So when there's a blue color cast, how do you get rid of it? Add in a bit of yellow. So that's how the info panel can be very handy. So as you can see there, if I click before, after, you'll see the image goes from looking really blue and cold to just a little bit more warmer. What's next? The next thing that I want to do is look at this image and think, okay, does it need any contrast adding into it through something such as curves? Now you could, if you want to, add another curve on top of this and then do a classic S curve, which is just bring up the highlights, bring this down, and then there you go. There's a nice bit of contrast been added in, but it's not very targeted. That's the problem. So although it is a quick fix, can look okay, let's click it on and off, it's added in other problems. The other problems is, of course, that I've increased the highlights, which is if you look down here, that's then actually accentuated those highlights down there. I don't want to do that. Let's remove that. What I am going to do is use a luminosity mask instead to actually pump in a bit of contrast in these trees here, because I feel they're lacking just a little bit, and also over here. So let's see if I click on a darks 1, what that's going to do. So, yep, so darks 1, that'll give me certainly what I want here. I don't know if a darks 2 is even better. Again, it's more targeted. You'll see the sky is starting to be masked out. We're losing the ground here, which is nice. I don't want to be affecting that at all. It's really these trees here that interest me, and over here. This is where all that light was filtering down from. So let's choose darks 2, click on layer, and then curves. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the hand tool there, and just to add in the contrast around here, the hand tool will target specific areas. So if you look on the curve, you'll see there's a circle appeared. So if I just click and drag down, that's just going to ever so slightly add in a bit more contrast in the shadows. Bring that down ever so slightly. Probably there. So you'll see it's added in just a little bit more contrast, and it's put a nice bit of punch into the image. For me, that looks pretty much, I'm not going to say perfect, nothing is ever perfect, but it's looking a lot better than it did. If you want to see how the image actually started out, if you hold down Alt and then click on the bottom eye on your Photoshop layers, what that will do is it will turn everything on and off that I've done so far. So if I do that, you'll see where we've come from to where we've got to. Okay, so what can we do with this image now? Is there anything else we can do with it? Of course, there are many things. A lot of people would look at it and go, well, I know I could do this, this, and this. And it's like, well, that's fair enough. Everybody has their own way of working in both Adobe Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop. I have mine right now, this particular image. This is how I'm going to do it, and this is how I feel that this is what I think it needs. One of the problems I do have, which I thought I had sorted, is the green grass that's down here. It's a bit too bright still. I thought I'd sorted it, but anyway, what can we do? Now, one thing I am going to do is actually do Command Alt and E again, just to blend everything back in again to one layer. And I do this so that basically when I'm applying a particular mask, a luminosity mask, it's only looking at this and not trying to look at, for example, the curves layer or this curves layer here. I want to be very careful where I'm getting things from. I want to create another luminosity mask to try and target this area. How can we better target this area rather than just using the darks, the lights, or even the midtones area? So if you click on pick, this will actually pick a particular color to work on. So obviously down here, this is a bit too bright. Let's see if I click on there, click OK. What it does is pretty much targeting the grass how I want it. Can I do anything else with a mask? Sure I can. Let's click on curves up here, see if we can affect that mask just a little bit extra than it is right now. So again, there's a problem up in the sky. Let's see if I can pull that down. No, that's actually, that's probably not so bad. What I'm trying to do is basically I only want the grass that's actually there. I don't want everything else. I'm seeing how refined I can get that mask just here, because trying to paint this mask in is never going to work. So if I click OK to that, what I've got is a very, very refined mask for just the grass. And what I'm going to do is actually use this as a basis for the mask. What I'm going to do in a minute, I'm going to use just another curves layer again. But when I create my curves layer from this luminosity mask, I can quickly go into the mask itself and paint this out. So let's just do that. So as I said, let's create a curves layer from this. So when I click on curves there, it creates my curves layer over here with the luminosity mask. Click on the mask itself, click Alt, hold down Alt and then click on it. So if I get my brush, which is already selected, bring the opacity up to 100, bring the flow to 100. Click on Shift to do that. Let's mask out all of this. I don't want this affected to be affected at all. It's only the grass down there that interests me. So let's remove that. Careful not to go over the mask down there. Obviously, it's working on tonalities, that mask, so it's in the luminosity, the brightness values of the pixels. So what I don't want is to affect too much. As I said, I only want the grass. So that's pretty much just the grass. So if I click on the curve symbol there on the layer, when I start adjusting the mask itself, it's only going to be affecting this grass here. If I click on the hand tool, let's see if I can just bring it down, make it so it's not so bright. There you go. That looks a bit better. It doesn't look so overpowering. Now, something else you can do when you're using curves, layers and levels as well, if you don't want the overall saturation to be affected here, because you'll see, for example, if I turn this on and off, it has become a little bit more saturated. Click on normal in your blend modes and then turn it into luminosity, and you'll see that what that does, very subtle difference between luminosity and normal. Certainly if you look here, you watch the saturation of the grass. It doesn't look as tainted, as it were. So that's that part. What's next? Well, again, there are things you can and can't do to this. I'm kind of tempted to leave it as it is. And I think probably because the lesson has maybe dragged on just a little bit, I will, at the moment, leave this particular image as it is. But if I do before and after, you will see the difference between the before and the after as to how much better it looks. So if I click off there, again, as I said, you'll see all that horrid blue color cast that was on the image. And if I hold down Alt, click everything again, you'll see it's been calmed down a lot. It looks a lot better. Maybe a touch of brightness could be added into the image. Let's just do that. Let's just push it up just a little bit just to see. I am actually affecting everything this time. I am going to do a very simple S-curve just to add it in. Bit of contrast. There we go. And I might actually, as I said before, take that to luminosity. Yep, that's pretty much how I would remember it. I know I've obviously added in a bit more here again, but that's okay. It has been calmed down. You'll see if I click on the curves, this curves here, that's pretty much done what I needed to. It's been calmed down. It's not so overpowering. It's not so overpowering. There you go. That's how I'm doing some of my images at the moment, that I'm blending them using a lot more Photoshop, certainly than a few years ago than I was. There you go. That's an image from the Dolomites. And if you happen to be interested in what it is that I'm doing, how I'm doing things, and want to join me, I am actually running a Dolomites tour from the 19th to the 26th of October 2019. So it will be based in Cortina and also in another place which hasn't yet been decided, over 7 days. Go and look on my website, www.julianelliottphotography.com. Details will be in the description below. There you go. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please leave any comments below. There's certainly a lot more of this type of thing to come. Got a lot more things that I want to do in Photoshop and Lightroom this year to show you what it is that I'm doing. In any case, off to Glencoe next week. Probably a few things coming up from there, we shall see, and also a few things coming up with a Mavic 2 Pro drone. So keep your eyes peeled on my channel, a lot more to come. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks again to all my old subscribers. See you again next time.